Welcome back to the Grit for Life, Living Wild and Running Free workshop. As I talked about before when we started this workshop, there's going to be a lot of interaction where we're going to be doing videos that are more geared toward the men and videos that are more geared toward the women. Not saying that the women should not watch those that are geared toward the men or vice versa. In fact, we highly are encouraging it, because the truth is that the more that we can get different perspectives in our lives, the better we are as individuals, the more rounded we are, the more that we can understand where others are coming from. And so if you're a man who has a significant other or a wife or a daughter or a mother or someone like that in your life, by listening to a lot of the videos that are geared more toward the women, you're going to have a better insight to how you can maneuver your life, your way of running free, living wild, to be able to coincide with that special individual within your life. And the same with the women. If you are a woman who has a son or a husband, a significant other, a father, a brother, some individual who's very important to you in your life or possibly in your future, by listening to these videos that are more geared toward the man's viewpoint or the men and how they should learn to live wild and run free, it'll give you a better insight. And that is one of the reasons that we're trying to do this, is because I think a lot of times, if you've ever read the book, The 5 Love Languages, and if you haven't, I highly suggest you do that, you learn that each of us have a communication style. And so many times where relationships, whether it be business relationships, whether it be intimate relationships, they fall apart because someone is trying to communicate with someone else in a different language that they don't understand. And if we can take a look at the other individual and see how their language is and learn their language and blend it with ours and learn to be able to explain our language, then we get a better understanding of how to move forward and how to build that relationship. This video is more geared toward the guys. Guys, I hope that my goal and my desire is that as we move through this living wild and running free workshop, that I hope that I can teach and encourage you and maybe show you some points that I have learned in my life. One of the things that you know, if you have been a part of Grit for Life at all, is that I am not the end-all be-all of knowledge. What I try to do and strive to do every single day of my life is to be able to look into the mirror and say, what can I learn today? What will make me a better man? What will make me a better husband, a better father, a better brother, a better son, a better well-rounded individual just in society? And in doing that, and through Grit for Life, I strive to live a very transparent life. I learned in the military that as a soldier, the best way to lead those who are coming up behind you is to learn from those in front of you and then leave the knowledge for those behind you. And that's what I hope to do through this series. Again, there's a lot of things I am still learning every single day. And there are things that you possibly can even teach me. My hope and desire is that through the things that I am going to be sharing with you, that you get a better grasp and understanding, and maybe even if it's just one small nugget of truth or several, that you will get a better understanding of how, as men, our past can shape us, but it doesn't have to define us. And our future is still yet to be shaped. It'll be up to us. Our response is our responsibility on how we look forward. We can choose to take the past and put it into the future. And sometimes that is good. And sometimes that is vitally important. And other times it is detrimental. In today's workshop, in today's video, what I want to do is literally start talking about that conversation about how our past, positive or negative, begins to affect and shape us as men. Many times, our past has set up a false precedent, in essence, a picture or a model of how we are to be as men that have actually set us up for failure. It has set us up to try to achieve things that were never meant for us individually to achieve, or that are unobtainable. And because of that, it has been obtainable for our fathers or our grandfathers. Or time itself has changed, and what in that time do we take from the past and use it today? Or with today's time, is there some things that don't match up from the past? William Shakespeare stated this: what is past? What is past is a prologue. As an author, that really spoke to me, because I understand that a prologue is exactly that. It is something that sets us up for the rest of the story. It is not the story. It is not the beginning, middle, or the end of the book. In fact, if that was the case, why read past the prologue? No, when we read a book that has a prologue, we read it and we understand this is what has happened. This is what's got our character or the hero of our story to this point. This is what's begun to shape the hero. Now, the hero has to decide where he or she goes from here. It'd be kind of a boring story and a boring book if we learned everything about the hero in the prologue. If the hero did not ever grow within that story that we are reading, didn't face conflicts, didn't come up on obstacles and then overcome those obstacles to become a stronger or more vital individual within the story context, then why read the book? Because we got everything we needed from the prologue. We're wasting our time. Sadly enough, though, many of us men, we're stuck in our prologue. We live every single day in the prologue, or in essence, in the past. We feel that our life has no real value. Do you ever feel that you're just getting up every single day like a robot and you're maintaining? We were never meant to maintain. Sometimes we will find that we do need to just maintain in order to get by. But just like if we just got stuck in the prologue, if we get stuck just maintaining this image of what we think we should be, or society tells us we should be, or our family heritage is instilled in us to be, then we're living a boring life. And living a boring life is not wild. It's not free. In fact, it shackles us into this cage. It shackles us into a box that says, you can't step out of this. I see so many men today that are living a life, and I have been there, where why live it? We have men out there that are dealing with depression, and so many men that are running from depression or masking that sense of not feeling valued, that sense of not feeling that we're really anything. Instead, we're just a pocketbook, or we're just an image. And many times we feel like that image really isn't us and we're a fraud. And so we live our lives in fear because we are afraid that at any moment somebody is going to look behind the curtain, such as the Wizard of Oz, and discover that we are not the great and powerful Oz. Instead, we are just someone at a fair barking on the midway, soon to ride away in a balloon. I love that analogy because in The Wizard of Oz, we discover that the wizard finally realizes that it's okay not to be the great and powerful Oz. Instead, the wizard says, you know what? It's time to go back. It's time to set myself free, put myself in a balloon, and allow the balloon to carry me into the wild and free, because that's where I was meant to be. So how does the past shape us? What part of the past do we need to reshape in our lives? Learn from, obviously, because those who do not learn from the past are apt to recreate and make the mistakes from the past. But we're doing that continuously. Another statement I think that is really important, another quote, is from Winston Churchill. I love Winston Churchill. I read a lot. I've read a lot about Winston Churchill. And Winston Churchill states, if we open a quarrel between past and present, we shall find that we have lost the future. If we are already living in a life where we are losing the future, then we are shutting off the value and the purpose of our lives. An animal in a cage feels as if it has no purpose other than to be the entertainment of those who see it in the cage. I've talked about this already in this workshop, that dancing monkey who could be swinging from trees and living in the wild, but instead, as soon as the organ starts playing, it starts dancing for the entertainment of those watching. There have been times in my life that I have felt that. There have been times in my life that I felt like really I had no purpose other than to entertain those who were in my life, whether it be a wife, whether it be children, whether it be those that I work around. When we get to that point, we have put ourselves in a cage. And the man and women, we were never meant as humans to be caged. It is the spirit of wild and free that has established civilizations throughout history. It is the spirit of the man and the woman who stood up and said, this isn't for me. I can't take this cage, this cave. I can't be captive. I need to run out into the wild and experience something new. Unfortunately, we live in a world here on earth that has so much of it has become already discovered. I think that's why space is so fascinating to so many people. In the words of Star Trek, talking about going and finding areas that have been undiscovered. Or the deep ocean. We know there's things down there, and it challenges us, and that fear kind of ignites something in us that says, oh, man, that would be cool. That'd be great to discover something that no one has ever discovered before. But in the whole context of the majority of our lives, I don't think many of us are headed to space. And many of us probably, I know me, I'm kind of claustrophobic. I don't want to be down in the deep, deep blue. So how do we find those conquering aspects of our life? We find it in our soul. That untapped areas of our lives that still need to be conquered. Untapped areas of our lives that we still can make a difference. But it's scary. It is scary to stop and to think and to reflect. Nelson Mandela made the statement about that. It says, especially for those of us who have lived in single cells, you had the time to sit down and think. And we discovered that sitting down just to think is one of the best ways to keep fresh and able. To be able to address the problems facing you. And you had the opportunity of examining your past. So let's do that. Let's start opening up something. Now, I will tell you, the next 3 weeks is going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. I'm going to challenge you because we as wild and free men need to be challenged. We will rise to that challenge, or we will fall prey to the monsters of our past, to the battles of our present, and to the enormous expanse of our future. Again, you'll hear me say this over and over. Our response is our responsibility. When you understand that principle, it becomes so huge because we then get to claim the power of our success. But in order to claim the power and the rewards of our success, we must understand the responsibility of our failures. We can no longer look back and say, but my dad or my mom or my family or my boss. No, we have to look back and say, that is what happened. My response to it was my responsibility. So let's start diving into this. Let's start taking a look at how our past can shape us, positive and negative. I'm going to share some things in this about my life, things that I have learned. Some of it is hard to share because it is my failures and my mistakes. But I have to, again, take responsibility for those moments in order to be able to reap the rewards of the future and to be able to live passionately wild and free in the present. So many of us men, we know how to be a man, or we should know how to be a man, relatively, in the eyes of society and civilization, from our fathers. Now, in that becomes some conflict. Where does the conflict lie? The conflict lies in that so many times, many of us, especially now, not as much the older generation, but many of us today, our fathers weren't present. Maybe they were, but they were struggling with their own fights and their own demons, and we learned from broken men. For those of us who didn't have men in our lives, we were trying to be taught how to be a man from the women in our lives, our mothers. How is it that an elephant can teach a tiger how to hunt? It cannot. Both are animals. Both of them have the need to eat. Both of them live in the wild. But the world looks totally different. Yes, there's similarities, as I stated. They both live in the wild. They both have to eat. They both have to sleep. They both have to survive. But how they do that are totally different things. They're both majestic creatures. The elephant, wild and free and strong and powerful. The tiger, noble and strong, wild and free. But for an elephant to teach a tiger how to be a tiger, or a tiger to teach an elephant how to be an elephant, virtually impossible. But and yet we have men today who have been raised by a generation of very strong and powerful women, independent women, women who had to make it work because they were given no other recourse, because the man in their life, the father of their child, decided not to be present. But unfortunately, they're an elephant or a tiger, trying to teach the other how to be something they really don't know. And that's not their fault. But as men, we have to understand that we may have learned the image of a man from a woman that had been hurt by a man. Many times that's rough. If you are a woman who is watching this and you're a single mother and you're trying to raise boys, you need to understand that yes, you are doing what you can. There is no shame in that. But just as there is no shame in an elephant trying to teach a tiger how to be a tiger and not really succeeding, you need to understand the power of surrounding your son, who you are raising, with good, well-rounded men of integrity, men of principle. As a father, I have strove my whole life, and as a man, I have strove my whole life to be there for other young men who I saw who didn't have that strong man in their life. And the same with even young ladies whose dad wasn't there. I have a daughter who biologically would not be my daughter, but she is my daughter. That is because I came into her life and I became that father figure, and I strove to be that father figure when there was no father figure. And today, she's my daughter. I claim her, she claims me, and when I say how many kids I have, she is in that number. But men, we're talking about us. We're talking about what we can do and how the past establishes who we are today, and why so many of us men feel so inadequate and we feel like we're fighting this battle that we cannot win. Men today, we don't feel that we can be open about our insecurities. So let's take a look. I grew up in a what would seem on the outside a very strong family until I was about 15. My parents were together until I was 15, almost 16. My father is my best friend now. Growing up, I have a lot of great memories of my father, and now being a dad, I know that my dad did what he could, and he strove to be the best father that he could be. There is a time period in a boy's life where they need their mom. I would say, and I think statistically, it would be said and would be able to be argued that from birth to probably early teens is that time where that boy needs his mom. That boy needs the nurture, and that's where that boy learns to love and to care and to be able to show that emotion. From the time that boy starts into his double digits, 10, 11, 12, and then into his teen years, is where that boy and that begins to start shaping into a man. And that is where the father figure really is important. And I now will argue that the father figure and the mother figure are important throughout. But this is where we really begin to see that a boy begins to really start understanding that he's bigger than something else, than himself. Unfortunately, when I hit that time period, my parents were really struggling. What I did not know and did not understand as a younger child was that my father was living a double life. My father had always known that he was gay. He was a homosexual, and during my early years, that was not as accepted as it is today. And so my father was living a facade. And I think that I learned subconsciously how to mask myself. At an early age, I was abused. I was molested by someone who was not part of my family. And I learned that you didn't show emotion. My early years, when I really felt like I needed to learn the power of who I was, my mother, I felt, now she has a different view, and that's fine. But remembering back and from my viewpoint, I felt like my mother was absent. And I now know that looking back, it was because she was really struggling with her and my father's marriage. But I didn't know that at the time. And I grew up very easily learning that, you know what? You put a veneer over your face and you smile. My parents were very active. My father was a pastor. My mother was the piano player, and they were both leaders in our church. And I would learn that at church, which we, in our religion at the time, where it was a constant, it seemed like church and religion was just prevalent. It was everything. But I learned that you are one thing in front of those at church, and behind closed doors, you're another. That is where I began to learn to put the veneer and the mask on that would, in essence, for a long period of my life, become my label. I became trapped behind that mask. Now, maybe your life is different in the essence of you didn't grow up religious, but there's still masks that we learn. Maybe your father was present, but yet your father wasn't emotional. Your father was this stoic, because as men, we are taught we have to be this stoic warrior. And we don't allow people to see past that stoicism, that warrior, that shield. And in essence, we carry the shield in front of us at all times. But a shield carried in front of us at all times becomes heavy. Our arms become tired. And when we start to drop that shield, that is when we leave ourselves open for exposure. Exposure that we are not really who we thought we were. Exposure to hurt and pain, to rejection. And so immediately, even though our arms are tired, we bring that shield back up because we cannot live past that shield. As a soldier, I learned, and even later on in law enforcement, I learned that if we continue to live behind the shield, we will become worn out and tired. If we live constantly in combat, we become fatigued. And become a fatigued warrior then becomes one that can easily, has a choice, can either become wounded to the point of not being able to be on the battlefield, or become wounded to the point of becoming aggressive to everything. Because it's just like that animal in a cage where it finally gets so tired of being just constantly in a 6x6 that anything that comes up at it, it strikes at. It strikes at. Because it finds it to be, its cage becomes so entrapped that it feels like that is the only safety it has. We have to understand that our past is our past, and it is what shaped us, but it shaped our past, and it shaped kind of who we are in the present. But it doesn't have to shape our future. But it takes a true warrior to start self-reflecting, to step away from the battle, because life is not always a battle, even though we have felt and have created it to be so. Even in peacetime, we have created ourselves that we don't let our shields down. I learned that when I started struggling with PTSD and I started going to therapy and asking, and my counselor said, you know what, you have learned that you always handle things later when there's not a mission to be handled, but yet you've never learned that there's sometimes not a mission to be handled. Sometimes the mission is ourselves. So how do we do that? How do we handle that? Our fathers, so society has established in us that if we're not manly enough, if we're not masculine enough, then we're probably not really a man. And that hurts us, that wounds us to the heart. One of the things that is talked about is a father wound. So when a young boy doesn't have his father around, a young boy begins to learn in an essence, there's a couple of things. A boy will learn from his mother how to be a man, or a boy will learn from other boys. When we learn how to be a man from another boy, it's like the blind leading the blind. And so when we hang around boys with a boy's mindset, and we try to think we're all manly because we're learning how to be a man from a boy, as a boy, then in reality, we get the Peter Pan syndrome. We never stop being a boy because we didn't learn from the maturity of those who've gone before us. We didn't learn what it was like, that it's okay sometimes to break down, because we're learning from other boys that, we try to flex and we try to swell up around our buds, our mates, our friends, the group, the gang. There's constant swelling because that's what you got to do. And so we learn our whole lives. We come up into our 20s, into our 30s, into our 40s, just constantly swole up. Don't be less, drink the beer. It's okay because real men, we just constantly drink. Then we become alcoholics. But it's okay because all the other boys, men, that we've hung around all this time are doing the same thing. Run around on our wives, run around on significant others, because our real men, that's what real men do. We love women, right? We love cars, we love guns, and I'm not saying that in essence, there's nothing wrong with guns. There's nothing wrong with cars. There's nothing wrong with falling in love with a significant other. And I say significant other because, as you are very aware, we are very LGBTQ friendly. I have a huge LGBTQ family. And so I'm not in an essence stating that it has to be just a woman. You can fall in love with whoever it is that you want, but it's still the same principle that I see so many times in the LGBTQ community. I see that, especially when it comes to men, they still are the same way. There is a tendency to find ourselves seeking that abusive relationship because why? We are abusing ourselves inside. We're not happy with ourselves. And so if we find someone else that we can coincide with that abuses us just as much as we abuse ourselves, that is familiarity. And it goes back to that sense. Maybe we had a father that constantly worked, was never home, constantly did not have the balance in their life. And it was just a constant. Maybe they were running from their home situation. They were running from their fear of being discovered as a facade. Maybe they were running and they worked. They became a workaholic and they never were around. And so as we are growing up, what do we learn? We learn that's what a man does. Yeah. A man sits there and is constantly working for that next goal, but to the detriment of his family. And so when we become a father, we're doing the same thing, and we're perpetuating a damaging image of masculinity, a damaged image. In fact, what we are doing is we are in a cage, and our children are born wild and free. Maybe we even marry a lady or a spouse, a significant other who's wild and free. And what we do is we try to overlord them, entrap them, because their spirit of wildness and their spirit of freedom is scary, and that's not what we are. And so we overlord them and control them and try to put them in their own cage. One thing that I really appreciate about my wife is that she is this spirit of independence and freedom. And I never strive to make sure that I try my best to not control her, because it is not my place to control my wife. Her life is hers. Mine is mine. And if we both can live wild and free, then we come together. The moment that that breaks up is when I begin to treat her as an object. I begin to treat her as something that I should control. And I know it seems like I'm all over the place, but my goal, my heart desires that you begin to see this pattern, that our past can really shape us. In my early life as a father, I was angry because I was not the man I needed to be. I was the man that society expected and that I thought I was supposed to be. When I became in my early 20s, being that my dad had been a pastor growing up, I wanted to emulate my father. And so I began to really study religion, and my goal was to be a pastor, and I got into the ministry, and I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy because I was living my dad's life. And I was living what I thought was to be a man. It wasn't until I began to sit down with my father later on, as I became older and he had moved on in his life. I remember going to my dad and I said, "Dad, this is where I'm at. I'm not happy." And I had already destroyed marriages, and I realized that I was on a path of self-destruction, but the more that I self-destructed, the more I tried to be manly in the sense of what I thought was supposed to be a man. I didn't show emotion, and I became angry. And so the emotion that I did show, I guess you would say, was anger. My first marriage was I self-destructed my first marriage, and it was signified by milestones of anger. If I would, excuse me, I would dare say that if you asked my first wife, excuse me, she would tell you, and I am very open and I take responsibility, I was horrible to live with. I would imagine, and I know I'm speaking for her, but I can only imagine this, that I know that she did her best to keep the marriage together, but I would imagine I was probably one of the worst men that you could probably live with. And I know if you know me in life, and if you know me through Grit for Life, she's like, "What?" And I share this, and I don't shy from this. The man that I am today is not the man that I was. I was a man of great anger and great rage. I was one that was a loose cannon. You had the term walking on eggshells was constantly used around me because it was true. You didn't ever know when I would explode. You didn't ever know, but it was because growing up in the way that I had grown up and growing behind a false facade by my early 20s, I had come to a point in my life that I was so scared. I knew I wasn't who I should be, but I didn't know anything different. And I was so scared that someone would look behind the veil and see that I was not who I pretended to be, but I didn't know where to go. And I had joined the military by then, and so I was still pursuing that persona of the masculine warrior, not understanding that the warrior sometimes does need to come home and drop his shield, and to be a father, to be a husband, to be a working individual of society, because at that time there was no battle. It was that time of healing, that time of nurturing. And so my anger was coming to a boiling point in my early 20s where I would lash out at anybody and everything, just like that caged animal, that anybody coming close enough to get inside the cage, no, you don't do that. In fact, I remember describing myself as a snake that was always ready to strike. I was proud of that, not realizing that was nothing to be proud of. I would just talk about how there were layers of me, and that I would never let someone inside the inner chambers of my life, because later on, when I started discovering this is how I described it, is I would never let someone inside the inner chambers of my life, because to do so, that was where the volcano was. And as much as I loved the people around me, I understood in that love that if I truly let you in all the way, you would be destroyed. How did I know that? Because every day I got up, I was destroying myself inside. I hated the man that was in the mirror. So how did I start moving forward? I show you how the past, very briefly, because I could do a whole workshop on how we build. I have 4 weeks to do this, and I have so many different topics to discuss. So we really are covering different small elements of it that I hope will encourage you to do some more research on your own, some more self-reflection, which we will talk about later. But my goal and desire is that we're starting to peel away some of those layers that you can relate to. In my life, I had to finally come to a point. I had chased away everything that meant anything to me, including my own self-worth. All of this had destroyed me to a point where I didn't like who I saw in the mirror. I was worn out. I was tired. I was exhausted. And for those who know my story, who have shared it, I'm not going to go into all of it right now. You know that there was a time where I was going through a divorce. I was homeless. I was unemployed. And I remember waking up one day and saying, this is enough. I can't keep doing this. I have two options. I can either check out and take my life, which I had people that needed me, even if I didn't fully understand, and even if I felt at that time they would be better off without me. But I realized they would be better off without that version of me. So either I could change that version or check out. And one of the things I will tell you right now, man, is checking out needs to be 100% off the table. When you take that off the table, there's only one option left, and that is to start conquering. We as men have that soul desire to conquer. It is ingrained in us generationally and through the history of mankind. And as I stated to begin with, there's not much left to conquer in this world, as in land. Yeah, we're constantly fighting wars and all that, but really everything's been pretty much discovered. So, what is that last frontier? Again, using a Star Trek term. One of those last frontiers is inside our soul. So when you take checking out, there's one off the table, there's one left thing to do. You look inside and you start learning how to fight inside. Fight those fears of inadequacy. Because ladies, we men, we're constantly fighting that. Fight those fears of not being enough. Because I promise you, when you discover truly who you are and how to live wild and run free, you realize you are enough. You just learn how to build that up now. You have that foundation ready. Yes, it might have some cracks in it, and that's where taking some of the past and bringing it forward into present and building for the future is a good thing. But then some of those building materials that we used to build with, we don't need to build with anymore. You don't see subdivisions built with thatch roofs here in America and across a lot of the world, or mud or whatever. What you do, you realize that we have some better technology for today. So what do? This is what I did. In my video, in my wife's video, you will see talk about a lot of self-reflection, and we're going to actually do one on particularly self-reflection. But I had to come to a point that I realized, listen, the past is the past, so let's take a look at it. My father, my grandfather, they were doing what they could, and whether they did it the best that I needed, okay, my response is my responsibility, so I can't blame them for that anymore. I need to stop here and now and say, what type of man do I want to be? What type of man? Now, again, let's clean the slate. Let's take that whiteboard of masculinity and wipe it off. Let's start brand new. Like, wait a minute, but yeah, that's scary. Absolutely. Because, wow, that's a lot. I'm 45 years old. I was in my mid 30s probably when I really started a lot of this. So what do I do in the mid 30s and I wipe the whiteboard clean? What do I do? That's scary. But boy, is it exciting. Why is it exciting? Because I get to build the new model and the new version of who I want to be and how I'm going to be this. I did this through learning principle living. You will hear a video soon that I will talk about creating your own ethos. A warrior ethos is something I learned in the military. And I began to use that and realize that in each of our lives, we need to live by an ethos. An ethos can be built upon the principles that have been taught and learned from those before us. But not everything. You take what was good quality, you bring it and you reflect on it and you say, okay, here's what I was given. This, anger, this overworking, this addiction, this not being vulnerable, not going to work for me today. Because it really shouldn't have worked for them, and it wasn't. So my father lived a very hard life for most of my life because he was trying to live something he wasn't. I don't want that for me anymore. I want to be genuine. I want to be authentically me. And you begin to throw away and then save, and you begin to build this ethos. I want you to know first and foremost that you need to start reflecting. Take a look at your past and ask yourself this. What did I learn from my past that isn't working? What have I put on? I love role-playing games. I love computer games that are that way. I love Dungeons and Dragons stuff. But as a character, you learn that you start off with basically nothing in a computer game that is like a role-playing RPG game. And then you get a leather suit of armor. But you know that's not going to keep you forever. And you pick up a chainmail, or you pick up some special element that has some special powers to it, and you throw away the rest of it, and you take this new stuff and you put it on. That is what we need to do now. You need to understand, first and foremost, men, from another guy, you're valuable. You are. You have potential. And what you're doing today has value to it. Yeah, I know that you've been hurt in the past. I know you've been rejected in the past, and I know that feeling of inadequacy. But you need to stand and look in the mirror and say, today is the day. Wiping the whiteboard clean. I am adequate. I'm going to build on the adequacy that I have. I am not going to try to live up to an image that I need to constantly keep a mask on and fear that image becomes a mask. What I need to do is drop that shield because my arm is tired. I need to drop the shield. I need to look in the mirror and I need to say, today is the day I'm going to start living wild and running free. Today is the day that I'm going to be me. And I don't even really know what that means yet. And that is okay because that is the start. We have to start somewhere. If you feel as if you don't know who you are, guess what? That's where you start. It's okay. If you feel as if you don't have all the answers and you're expected to have the answers, guess what? Admit that. I want you to look in the mirror and say, hey, you, guess what? You don't have all the answers. And it's okay not to have all the answers. It's okay not to be Superman. It is okay not to be a superhero. There you might be that in someone else's eyes, but every Superman has kryptonite. We forget that. So my friend, today, what I want you to do is to start taking a look. So my challenge to you for the soul portion of this, for the men, I want you to sit down and I want you to write out things that you are not happy with. And I don't mean you personally, such as your weight, the way that you look. What I want you to do is start looking at your past And I want you to say, you know what? My dad wasn't there. My response is my responsibility. I'm not going to hold that against him. Dad, I forgive you for that. Now, what am I going to do today to move forward? My dad was a workaholic. My dad had a false sense of masculinity that was overlording to my mother, to my family, to those around him. My father taught me that it was okay to, whatever it is that you know in your heart, it's not making you happy, but you are emulating it. You write that down. Underneath that, I want you to write this then. I want you to start taking pieces and saying, this is what I'm going to work on, and prioritize it. I can't prioritize it for you. If you need help, though, you personally message me. You can reach me at gritforlife2015@gmail.com. But what I want you to do is then look in the mirror and say, my whiteboard is clean, and today I get to open the door to my cage. Today I get to drop my shield, because today is the first day that I get to rebuild who I am. Rebuilding doesn't mean you throw away everything, but rebuilding does mean you throw away what doesn't work. Your response, your responsibility. Go grit it.